Have been looking at Wolfgang Streeck's five disorders of capitalism, and we come to the fifth and the last, but not the least disorder. And so we come finally to the fifth disorder. Global capitalism needs us. So global capitalism needs a center to secure its periphery and provide it with a credible monetary regime. Now, capitalism by its very nature is global in the sense that capital, that is accumulation for the sake of accumulation, is something universal. That is, it is not restricted to a particular time or place. It can happen at any time, any place, in principle. But obviously, capital accumulation occurs at a specific place at a specific time, but it's not limited to it. So when we say global capitalism, in a sense, capitalism is global by definition. But capitalism can be restricted to specific or particular purposes or entities. So you can have a national capitalism. That is, you are committed to accumulation for the sake of accumulation, but for the sake of your nation. So you put a limit to capitalism in that sense. In the sense that the supreme is not the capital but the nation. Whether you can keep that hegemony of nation over capital for in the long run is something else. But in principle, we had national capitalism. Similarly, you can have an individual capitalism. So you don't worry about accumulation at the level of region or nation, but you are more worried about capital accumulation for yourself as a capitalist or as an individual. So you're looking after the interests of capital accumulation as far as it is accumulating for you. At the national level, you are looking for the accumulation of capitalism, but as long as it concerns that nation, that particular nation, similarly region. But you are capitalist par excellence when you are looking for accumulation for the sake of accumulation. as such. So it doesn't matter where it is actually accumulating. What matters for you is accumulation for the sake of accumulation. And maybe because you are concerned with humanity, in the case of socialism, or some other purpose. But so this is a universal dedication to capitalism, in the sense that you are concerned with accumulation for the sake of accumulation. As such, you are not concerned with. So you might sacrifice the individual interests. You may sacrifice the national interest if it is required for accumulation, for the sake of accumulation as such. So this can be considered global capitalism. So you are dedicated to capitalism as such, and not to nation or individual, or accumulation for the sake of nation, or accumulation for the sake of individual, but accumulation for the sake of accumulation, that is overall accumulation, universal capitalism or global capitalism. Finally, to the fifth disorder, global capitalism needs a center to secure its periphery and provide it with a credible monetary regime. But what he means by global capitalism here also the system which we call capitalism as it exists today at the national and international level. So this is a more specific sense of global capitalism. Capitalism as a world system, capitalism as a system which runs the show today. It's talking about that capitalism. And this capitalism has its center and it also has its peripheries. And by center he means those countries where capitalism started and where capitalism is mature. And capitalism is mature in a country or in a region when it is a dominant force at the level of individual, society, as well as the state. So we will call that capitalism in those countries are mature. Is mature in the sense that it has legitimacy, firstly. It has economic and political power, which is both capitalist, and it has a value system and education system, which is capitalist. In such countries, capitalism finds itself at home. Capitalism finds itself at capitalism finds itself at home. So capitalism has long-term commitment to these countries. So in today's world, you'll say, most of the Northwest European countries, or Western and Northern European countries, European countries where and those colonies of Europe where, like America, United States of America, Canada, New Zealand, Israel, and all those countries which are basically extensions of European societies. And number three, you have those countries which have actually become capitalist due to various reasons. And so Japan would be a country which we can call, or to lesser extent South Korea. So these are centers of capitalism, where capitalism is mature, when capitalism finds itself at home. Then there are countries which are like China, and Russia, which are semi-capitalist. And there are a lot of those countries. But China and Russia are important because although they are not fully capitalist, they are very powerful countries. So capitalism finds them necessary. It can't, overly exploit them, easily exploit them. So it has to deal with them as, powerful entities. So it doesn't. They're not fully capitalist. So capitalism doesn't found at home in these countries, but it cannot fully, ignore them because they are so powerful, and also because they are so they're huge countries with huge economic potentials. So capitalism deals with them in a more circumvented and circumspected way. So that's the center. So these are the countries. Obviously, they are not center, but they are nearer to center. And then you have a hierarchy among periphery as well. So among periphery, the nearest to centers are countries like India and Brazil, which are not fully capitalist, but capitalism is not threatened by those countries and values in them. So it is hoped that one day they will become part of the center, or they will come nearer to the center or part of them. And then you have countries where there is exploitation at different levels. So then you will have other East Asian countries and Middle East. So there's a lot of exploitation. and capitalism doesn't find itself at home in those countries, especially in Middle East. Um, but exploitation still is circumspect to a certain extent. And then you have countries which capitalism, which are, the outer center of periphery, like Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Capitalism is threatened by these countries for various reasons. Or at least, if not threatened by these countries, it doesn't find itself at home in these countries. So capitalist investments and objectives in those countries are short-term and exploitative in nature. And then you have the most outer layer of periphery, sub-Saharan countries, for example, where capitalism basically the only mode is exploitation, or the dominant mode is exploitation. So this is just a rough sketch of this distinction between the center of capitalism and periphery. The examples are not that important, but the concept is important. So you might disagree with me and how I classify them, but the important thing is, if a society is capitalist at all levels, like at the level of individual, at the level of society, and at the level of state, and the capitalism is mature there and it finds itself at home. So that's the center, and then the periphery are those countries where capitalism is not fully captured, has not fully captured either society or individual or state or all three. So capitalism doesn't find itself at home in those countries, and its relationship with those countries is exploitative and also short run. And it uses those countries to extract resources. It uses those countries to dump, crises, for example, or channel crisis towards them. And it's basically its relationship with those countries is instrumental. So that's the basic difference, I think, which is very important. So we come finally to the fifth disorder. Global capitalism need a center to secure its periphery and provide it with credible monetary regime. And the second thing is that capitalism is a total system and civilization which is both a political system as well as economic system. So accumulation or capital, so accumulation of money and accumulation of power, force, two sides of the same coin. So capital, as the capital accumulates and concentrates at some center, power also concentrate at the center. And also capital need power for its protection as well, and to restructure the system according to its requirements. So capitalist system is both the system of accumulation, money and power. And money requires power, and power requires money to protect capital and capitalism as a system, and to reproduce it at all the level of the individual, level of the society, level of the state. That's why at the national level you have the capitalist state is very important for, to protect and sustain and reproduce capitalist economy. So laws, regulations, education system, etc., social system. So you can't have, so at the national level you have a capitalist state and you have a capitalist economy, and they capitalist economy needs capitalist states, and capitalist state needs capitalist economy. At the international level, you need the same thing. At the start, you had these companies which were both like East India Company, for example. It was a company, capitalist company, but it also was a government in the sense that it had its own army, it printed its, its own money, and it had its own justice system or injustice system. But when capitalism expanded, this role was East India Company obviously could play that role of government because it had a charter from the British government anyway. But when capitalism expanded, these international companies could not act as government anymore, so this was relegated to Britain as a global power, which was to play the same role, the role of the state, the same role which a national state play at the level of nation. The same role was to be played at the international and the global level. At the global level. And then when Britain declined, then this role was transferred to the US, the United States of America, and to this day United States is playing this role or trying to play this role. But from the day one, there's a contradiction here between the role Britain played or the US playing, is because both Britain before it and the US is a national, it's a nation state, elected and sustained by its people, And so the US is a nation state. But when it plays its role at the international level or the global level, it plays this role as the global agent of capitalism and not as a nation state. But it's hard for it to sustain this dual role, and more than often the hegemony of Britain and the hegemony of the US at the global level its role as a nation state or its interest as a nation state, Trump, its role or its role as the central state of capitalism, which it actually never was. So from the day one, there is a contradiction in the capitalist system. In that, as a global system, it requires a global state, but it doesn't have a global state. And the countries which play the role of global state, as the US, it's actually a nation state, so which first of all look after the interests of its own nation and not the capital in general or universal capitalism. And those contradictions are always there, and I try to hide those contradictions or try to overcome those contradictions by trying to create so-called international institution like World Bank and IMF and all those international institutions to play that role. But international institutions themselves don't have any power, they don't have any army, they don't have any currency. So the currency of the US, the dollar, is the currency of the global capitalism, but the dollar is basically the currency of the nation state called America as well, and it reaps the benefits of this role of dollars, but it doesn't really but since it is not really a global state, it's easy to see how it can exploit the interests of global capitalism for the sake of its own strength and the strength of its economy, etc. So capitalism needs America, but America is a nation state, and it can't. Obviously, it does play that role, but it can't play the role of the global hegemon consistently because it is also a nation state. Firstly and foremost, it's a nation state. So as the global capitalism weakens, those contradictions come into play more and more. And America more and more explicitly become, a power which looks after the interest of its own nation rather than the interests of global capitalism as such. So I think this is the context in which he is talking about the fifth disorder of capitalism. So we will look at the actual text next time.